Welcome one more time to our International People Mobility Club. We have the pleasure today to be together again in order to share best practices, share knowledge regarding the international people actions. And I would like, my name is Stephanie Zweifel. I'm the client engagement director at Aon, and I have the pleasure to introduce and welcome today to Elena Cañón, who's a principal associate at Garrigues, and Jost Meye, human resources director at Amadeus. I hope I, pronounced your name correctly, Jost. And it's difficult, like mine, right? Like mine, which is it's awful, when it's what's your name? It's like, oh my God, we better don't even say a word. And
Steffi Zweifel, are you Swiss?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, that's what I thought.
Yeah. So it's a great pleasure to have both of you today with us. And let's go ahead. Let's talk about international mobility.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Steffi. So Jost, thank you very much for your time and for sharing your knowledge with us today. We would like to speak with you about your experience in talent programs and international mobility.
Mm-hmm.
In this respect, in a company with a broad international presence such as Amadeus, how important do you think is the international mobility in talent management?
As you've already said, Amadeus is a very global and internationally active company. We have a presence in 190 countries. We have a physical office in more than 100 countries. Mobility has always played an enormously important role at Amadeus. I believe at our headquarters in Madrid, we boast to have more than 50 nationalities under one roof, or just sort of 900 employees. That shows you a little bit the international breadth and width of the organization. But obviously, when you operate in such a space, you do not only rely on sourcing international talent on a local basis, but also you make use of various global mobility programs. And Amadeus has had pretty long history of using various programs that we try to tailor towards the needs of the business, but also the needs of the individual or their families, because of the various surroundings that are typically associated with a mobility situation. So we do have short-term, typically a skill gap filling for just a few months. We do this very often when we are in situations where we help a customer, oftentimes the global airlines, to board on one of our programs or one of our technologies. And in order to implement that at the airline site, be that in Canada, for Air Canada, for instance, we will bring in people for something like 9 to 15 months to help local Amadeus folks to actually manage that cutoff and manage that situation. We also have local plus, which are typically 2 to 3 years. We use them most of the time, and because we found that typically sending somebody on an assignment with a local salary at the host destination and just providing necessary expatriate type allowances in most jurisdictions will actually work very, very well, and the integration of the individual into the local community is much easier. We also use the classic text equalized ones. Those are typically used for people, let's say, to come from our development hub in Nice to go into India or into some other places which are difficult to fill and where the differences in standards of living are really significant. And then finally, and that is something that we've seen is increasingly happening, is what we call permanent transfers. That's open-ended transfers from one location to another, where oftentimes it's not only because of the talent development of the individual, but also because the individual have raised their hands and said, look, if there's anything coming up interesting, potentially in Dallas or in Singapore, or perhaps in Tokyo or some other place, I would like to be considered, because I think it's great for my career, it's great for the experience I can make. And then we don't send people on typically expatriate assignments, but we provide the infrastructure for them to go on a permanent, open-ended assignment, which means that they sever the ties with their home country and embark fully on the host country. So that is what we are typically doing in terms of various programs. Talent management in the international field plays an enormously important role for Amadeus.
Okay, this is great. Moving now to one of the most actual topics at the moment. Digitalization makes the workplace more flexible. And we would like to know, according to your experience and your knowledge, how has digitalization impacted on Amadeus International Mobility Management? Have you seen any different ways to manage the mobility in the last year, and what's your experience about that?
Yes, it's a very interesting question. I think it's something that many companies ask themselves, because, I mean, when the COVID crisis began in March last year, I think most companies overnight had to improvise and come to terms with work from home arrangements to a far larger degree than had been the custom before. I mean, we have seen this in all locations at Amadeus. I mean, not only did certain governments stipulate that companies offer work from home arrangements or made it mandatory, for instance, in many places in Asia for a time. Singapore comes to mind, Korea comes to mind, our China offices, Japan. It was not allowed to go to the office. You had to work from home. As a tech company, since we are not producing cars or chemicals or something, obviously working from home is much easier because everybody has a computer, everybody has typically a laptop. So people took their laptops home, connected from home and continued with work. But the infrastructure had been also improved and scaled up during that period. But obviously, to come back to the mobility scenario, what we've seen, I wouldn't say in droves, but what we have seen increasingly is the request from people to relocate permanently to another place and continue working from there. As I said, I mean, in Madrid alone, we have 51 different nationalities, particularly during crisis. And when you have a young workforce, people feel possibly a little more safe or a little more at home when they're close to their family. So we found situations where people in the crisis relocated back to their native Italy. In my case, I relocated back to Germany and have been more or less permanently in Germany since March last year. And obviously, these situations then give rise to completely new mobility scenarios because of various tax, social security, and compliance reasons. You cannot work in one country and be employed from an employer in another country for a longer period of time. You can only do it a couple of weeks, possibly 1 or 2 months. But really, you can't do it for an extended period of time. So those are the scenarios that we have been seeing. So basically, the activity or the proactivity is on the side of the employee approaching Amadeus HR, saying, look, I'd feel more comfortable actually working from my native Croatia, Italy, whatever, than continuing to be in London or in Madrid. Can you do something about it? And then we had to see and adapt and see whether it would be possible to find a work agreement, to find a contractual agreement with the individual in their native country with an Amadeus entity that typically we would have, but obviously that creates new challenges. So that is basically what we have seen and what we are seeing increasingly. We are currently in the final stages of coming up with a global framework and policy on a work from home and a work from anywhere policy that will outline certain ground rules that we hope that the global HR community at Amadeus will be able to find useful and can follow, and that will also give a guideline and a framework to our employees when they want to consider something like that. And finally, I think this work from home or work from anywhere that we've seen as part of the COVID crisis has also led to many people, particularly in the tech space, where they are very technology driven, they are very much in line with the latest technology, with their PC, working from the Starbucks or working from anywhere really, that they would basically be far more marketable and they would be open to positions that they never would consider before, because in the past, typically you would have to relocate if you wanted to consider a new employer. And potentially, I mean, we have 4,400 people working in Nice alone. Many of them are in the R&D and software development space. In the past, until about a year ago, they would only look in the vicinity. So they would look in the Nice area, in the Côte d'Azur area, if there was any tech jobs out there. But now with the crisis and the work from home and work from anywhere policies coming up, employers potentially in Lyon, in Paris, or in other places in France are a possibility for them, because they don't have to relocate, they don't have to leave their home, they don't have to uproot their children from school, but they can continue to work from their home space and just join a new employer. So I think that also brings with it new challenges, new ways of working, new ways of addressing the employees' needs and trying to be continue to be attractive for the employees so that they stay with you.
Yes, I completely agree with you. As a result of these new work models, do you think that the traditional figure of the expatriate will disappear at any moment?
No, I don't think it will. I don't think it will. We've seen, as I said, I mean, we've seen a trend over the past years, even before COVID, of less typical expatriate type assignments like the local plus or the tax equalized, and people or the company as a whole, and also the individuals, the employees, embracing more readily permanent arrangements. So we've already seen that, but there will always remain a need for certain either talent development scenarios where one says it is absolutely vital that a certain individual spends a few years in another environment, in another business unit, in another cultural environment, so that they are exposed to that and we can see whether they can actually manage within that different environment and how successful they are. And obviously, we will continue to see specific skill gap needs where, as a company, we want to move a particular individual from one place to another because we feel that there is a gap and this individual is capable of filling the gap and willing to relocate. And we will continue to see those. They won't go away. They will stay with us. And the company will continue to have these kind of scenarios. But I think from a pure quantity and volume point of view, it will possibly go down. We've had, during the crisis last year, we had a number of mobility assignments lined up. That didn't happen. I mean, we had a number of signed up from Asia into Madrid, from the US into Asia, from Nice into Asia, which just didn't happen because of the crisis, because people couldn't relocate, people wouldn't get an entry visa, people wouldn't physically be able to travel, no matter what the reasons were. So we had to defer and postpone. And I think one of the things that will make Amadeus continue along the road of international assignments, as I said at the beginning. I mean, we are a very international company, and because we are in the travel space, travel, business travel, private travel is somehow in our DNA. So we board a plane when it's feasible, when it is possible. We travel, we are with our clients, we are with our colleagues where this is possible. And it's not something that is actually a big thing for most of Amadeus employees. So travel and being not necessarily in the place where you were born is something that comes quite natural to Amadeus employees.
Yes, yes, that is. Although you already pointed that out, what difficulties have you faced from Amadeus in managing the international mobility in the recent year and months in terms of legal, human resources, organization? What are the difficulties and the main topics that you have faced during these months?
I've already touched on a few of them. I've touched on the request from a few individuals to be given a new employer in their native country, which was certainly something that is with us and that cannot be answered with a one-size-fits-all, but needs to be tailored to the case at hand. I've also personally been involved in one of my team members who used to work also in Madrid, and because of the crisis, she found herself in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, where her boyfriend is. And when the question came in terms of do you want to return to Madrid and continue with your role, or do you feel more comfortable in Amsterdam? The lady told me, if at all possible, I would prefer to be in Amsterdam. So we started making inquiries with the local HR department and see whether there was a possibility to hire her locally. And that was feasible, but she's doing exactly the same role as before, but most of the time actually remotely. Another case that comes to mind was one of the last transfers last March. Somebody flying out from the US, a French lady actually, somebody flying out from the US on a permanent assignment to Madrid, and finding when she arrived in Madrid that all hotels had been closed. And she couldn't go into temporary accommodation, and she didn't know where to go. And because of the crisis, her stuff wouldn't come. So she couldn't go into a permanent apartment because it was stuck at harbor someplace, her boxes and containers. So we had to help her find some Airbnb furnished abode for a few months before the situation normalized somewhat, because it just wasn't possible to find any hotel or hotel apartment accommodation because everything in Madrid during the first lockdown was closed. And those were particularly challenging individual situations that arose. But I think on a more conceptual basis, what we will see is that, like other companies, Amadeus too is going to formulate, as I said, work from home, work from anywhere policies that will see a lot more flexibility, a lot more leeway to maneuver and be tailored towards the needs of the employees to a much greater degree than in the past. And something which I think the employers have all seen, that during the crisis, it is very well possible to have a workforce that typically you don't see. I mean, that you don't see physically. You see the people on the screen, you see them through Teams, Zoom, other means, Skype or whatever, but you don't actually are with them physically in the same space. And that is possible. I think over time, that will become more challenging as team composition changes, as new members are being hired, some old members leave the team, and when as a manager or as a new team member, you never have seen someone in action physically and personally, face to face, the integration of a new team member into a new team is potentially, I think, much more difficult. It might take more time, and there will be challenges along that way over time, I think. But we will need to find new ways of collaborating and working together, and sort of going along with that.
Yeah, that's totally true. And maybe we are running faster than the legal and the tax legislations that are not helping, because they are not thinking about these possibilities, because we're moving faster than the legislators. So we need to be adapted to these new circumstances. Well, I think that as a conclusion of this catch-up, maybe we can highlight these new forms of working that are arising at the moment, that maybe will be permanent, who knows? And also maybe we can highlight the importance of the international experience which allows the companies to develop the talent of their employees and executives, and to promote the professional growth of the workforce. So thank you so much for your time, Jost. It's been a pleasure. It's been very interesting to hear your experience and your knowledge. Thank you so much for your time, and we see you soon. Hope in person.
Yes, we'll see each other in person very soon. You take care. All the best, Elena. All the best, Gabriela and Steffi. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.